Hello, I'm Dr. Alec Hammerdiner. Welcome to Discrete Event Simulation. This is Lecture 21, Intermediate Modeling. I will talk about entity-dependent sequences, data requirements and availability, and also discuss verification and debugging. We will talk about Model 7.1 from the ARENA textbook and design a small manufacturing system. So as you can see, this is a drawing of the manufacturing system that we will design, and it consists of four cells: cell 1, cell 2, cell 3, and cell 4. And as you can see, cell 3 has two machines, but the other cells 1, 2, and 4 have a single machine. So parts arrive here, and then they go and get developed in some of these four cells, and then they depart. And cells 1, 2, and 4, as I mentioned, have a single machine, while cell 3 has two machines, and more importantly, one of the machines in cell 3 is faster than the other one, so the newer machine is 20% faster. So that is quite an interesting situation, because before we always considered an identical resource units, and now we will need to figure out a way to model non-identical resource units and combine those in the set. So here we have a circular layout of cells, and parts enter at left, exit at right, travel only clockwise, and we assume that all transfer times are 2 minutes. Of course, this might not be realistic, but this is just a first model. So here you can see we have different cell times, and they're dependent on the part type. So we actually have 3 separate part types, and inter-arrivals of all types of parts are merged, and we assume that its exponential was on average 13 minutes arrivals. And we have types 1, 2, and 3 parts, and 26% of all parts are type 1, 48% type 2, and 26% type 3. So before, what we used to do when we saw something like this, we would introduce a decision module, but we just gonna use an assign module, and I'll show you how to easily do this using an assign module. So as I mentioned, right, different part types have different type of movement, and specifically they have quite different routes. As you can see, part 1 in this row, we see the movement of all parts 1. So part 1 first visits cell 1, and this is the distribution parameters for the time, processing times. And so all processing times are triangular, and here's their parameters for this triangular distribution. So then, after being processed in cell 1, the next station for part type 1 is cell 2, and then cell 3, and then cell 4. And after that, the part 1 exits the system. And then for all parts 2, they first visit cell 1, then 2, then 4, and they come back again to 2 and being processed there again. But as you can see, they're actually processed with a different distribution. So the parameters in the first entry into cell 2 of part 2 is different from what we see here as a returning time at cell 2. And then after the second time at cell 2, part 2 moves to cell 3, and after that it exits the system. And then for part 3, it's different as well, and it starts at 2, then 1, then 3, and again, all different parameters for the triangular distribution. So we want to observe utilizations, times, and numbers in queues, and cycle times, also known as total times in the system, by part type. And because we want to do that, you can see one way to do that, it would be define parts as specific entity types. And we will run this simulation for 32 hours. So to be able to model this small manufacturing system, we will use some new arena concepts that will be very helpful. So first of all, we need to be able to model non-identical machines at cell 3. And we also need different entity types that follow different process plans. And so previous models, all entities went through the same sequence of stations, maybe with some kind of decides for branching. So the important part here is we had same sequence, so it wasn't, we just used the model logic to figure out the movement. But now we'll actually will be able to define sequences, right? And the sequence is actually a modeling construct that is found in the advanced transfer panel. So now we need process plan with automatic routing by entity type. And so we'll use this sequence construct and we'll assign a separate sequence or different sequence for each entity, just like an attribute. So an entity sequence is actually an attribute, and an entity can follow its own sequence. So we will not use direct connect or routes. Instead, we'll tell sequences, we'll tell entities to use sequences. And Arena internally keeps track of where entity is and where it will need to go on the next step. So our modeling approach is the following. Usually there are many ways to build a correct Arena model, and also many ways to build an incorrect model. And it's very important to think about the data structures that are used in the model. First of all, what data are available? How will they be stored in the model? So we'll use the following data structures for this model. We'll use the sequence for part transfers. And as a part of sequence definition, we can define attributes. So inside of the sequence, there is a way to assign different attributes, specific type of expressions or values. And so we do that for processing times at all cells but cell 1. And we use an expression for processing times at cell 1, and this is just done to demonstrate that there is alternative ways to do things. We could have then also had an attribute for cell 1, or we could have expressions for other type of cells. So again, right, this is a useful way to see how different things could be how things can be done in a different way. And we'll use variables for new machine speed up at cell 3. And so we'll introduce this part transfer times as well. And that will be modeled as a variable. So when we look at sequence data module, as I mentioned earlier, it is found in advanced transfer panel. And so you can click on a new row for each process plan, a name for each sequence, and then open steps column for sub-dialogues. And then we can define order sequence of stations to be visited. Again, must have station names already defined. And then we can double click to add new station to the bottom of the sequence list. And then right click to insert a row. a name for each step. And you can also have possible assignments for attributes, variables, pictures at each station in the sequence, and this can be done before transferring entity to this step in the sequence. So in this model, the attribute assignment used to attach process time attribute to an entity for next cell, except for, as I mentioned, cell 1. So again, we can assign sequence name to entities that follow it, and in the route modules, we can then refer to the sequence as our destination type instead of having destination type as a station. And so in that case, a department entity will look in its own sequence, because sequence it's an attribute of the entity, and so each entity should have some kind of sequence assigned to it to know where to go next. So Arena tracks sequence following entities using automatic attributes. So the sequence name, or NS, or entity.sequence, also the station where entity is going to, M, or entity.station. So as you can see, right, if you have entity dot something, that's your automatically defined attribute. So you can see that both sequence and station are attributes for the entity. Also has a job step along the sequence, and that's IS, or entity dot job step, so another attribute. And normally, entity is assigned a sequence and travels its route, then exits. So we can interrupt the sequence and jump forward and backward, right? But that's tricky. So remember to always define the exit station. And we have also expression data module. We'll use an expression, as I mentioned earlier, and that is found in Advanced Process panel. So we're going to be using this for processing times at cell 1. And we could have done this in sequences as for other cells. So again, as I mentioned, we're just doing this to illustrate its use, right, or alternative way to do the same thing. And so we'll have 3 part types at cell 1. So we'll use a vector valid expression with 3 rows. And then name for expression will be cell 1 times. And we'll have, again, 3 rows. And we use the expression value as subdialog to do that. So we'll also have this depending on the part times. So we'll have cell 1 processing times for 3 different part types. And it's important to remember that it's very crucial to keep the order in mind, because the order in which we list those matters, because the index is part type, so we will reference cell 1 times part index in the model. So we'll also introduce variable data module, and this is found in the basic process panel. And we'll use factor variables as well to indicate the speed factor for cells 3. We actually need a 2-row vector because we have 2 machines, a newer machine and an older machine. So we assume that the newer machine is faster and the older machine is slower. And we'll put the newer machine first and the slower machine second, so that we can first have a machine 1, and then if machine 1 is already busy, then we'll be using machine 2, and we'll repeat selecting those to use the cyclical selection. We also set 0.8 for index 1 because it's going to be 20% faster, and then we'll set 1.0 for index 2 because this is just a regular time for old machine. We'll introduce also another variable called transfer time, And this variable will hold transfer time constant of 2 minutes between stations. And this is just a scalar, not a vector or a matrix. And used for model generality, and it's also convenient to later, if we have some kind of change and decide it's not 2 times between all the stations but 3 times, we can change it. So again, if all transfer times are changed, right, this would be easier for us to make this change from, say, 2 minutes to the 3 minutes. And these are initial values of variables, so any entity can change them if you wanted to. But in this model, we'll just keep them constant. So again, we'll have another type of structure. And so we'll use set data module. Again, from the basic process, we have 3 sets. We have resource set, so 3 machines for new and old machines. We'll specify resource names. And we'll have entity picture set, part pictures to attach entities once their part types is determined. And the picture names could already define themselves also elsewhere, so we can use edit entity pictures or define them here. And then entity type set, we have entity types. And this is very important because, right, we need to attached to entities, right, a specific type once their part type is determined, because they will, go through the system based on their type. So we'll define entity types here, and not only we'll use the set, but we also use advanced set. But advanced set is not in the basic, it's in the advanced process, and that's because the sequences cannot be, we want to combine the sequences in the set, but we cannot combine them in the basic process set. So again, right, that type of set data module does not have other category for the type, and that's what we need in order to get the sequences combined together into a set. So we'll define name of set to be part sequences. The set type will choose other, and then in the members subdialog we'll add rows and type in names. So let's go ahead and do that, right? And in terms of the run setup, we'll change in the replication parameter tab, we'll change replication length to 32 hours, 24 hours per day. We'll select base time units as minutes. So let's go ahead and start with that and change the run setup. So let me demonstrate this in Arena. So here I'm open my Arena model, and right away I'm going to save the model as model 7.1 in the book in my folders, IE467 models. So now that I save this, right, and if you don't have your new model file open already, you can either go File New or click here on this new icon and then click File Save As, of course. And so the first thing I want to do is going to change my setup. So I'm gonna go to Run Setup, and then in Replication Parameters, I'm going to change the replication length to 32 hours, and I want to change my base time units to minutes. And that's very important because, as you remember, we're going to have some expressions, and so we need to make sure that we're using the correct base time units. And let's also, in the project parameter, let's change this to model 7.1 from the book. And let's say this is small manufacturing system. So again, right, we wanted to do to collect some statistics on resources and the queues. So these are selected. So I can click apply, right? We already changed what we needed to change in replication parameters. So I click OK. And the next thing I want to do is start building my system. So a few things that I want to do is also attach some of the panels that I'm going to be using. So notice here only basic process panel is attached, and of course we have reports and navigation. So let me go ahead and attach some additional templates. So I'm going to click here to attach a template on this icon, and then I'm going to select the advanced process.tpo, and that's template for advanced process. So now I also have advanced process. And I also will need advanced transfer. So I'm going to click again on attach right here. As you can see, I clicked on attach template panel icon. And here among templates, I also have advanced transfer. So I'm going to select it as well. And so now I'm set to get started. So as we mentioned, we're going to have some variables. So let's go ahead and do some of the variables. And also do some attributes. So as you know, we're gonna use an attribute called part index. So let me go ahead and create this attribute called part index. And I will be using that. And I will also use the process, my process time will be another attribute. So let me go ahead and define this attribute. So now I define the process time as my attribute. And another thing is I'm going to be using this machine index. And that's because I have two machines, the old machine and the new machine. So my machines, I need to distinguish between them. So I'll have machine index as an attribute that will indicate which machine I'm using. So I'm done with this type of data structure, right, which we use, right? And these will be attributes because I want each entity to know what kind of part it is. So part index, whether it's part 1, 2, or 3, it's process time, and also the machine index, right? If it goes through cell 3, where we have two different machines. So the next thing I want to do is to go to variables, which are also a variable is in the basic process. So I'm going to click on variable, and I'm going to define a variable called factor time, and that's to take care, as I mentioned earlier, of the difference in the speed for the two machines. And the factor time, because there's two different machines, is going to be, as I mentioned, the vector with 2 rows. And so I click here on rows and press 2, and I also want to include initial values, so I'm going to double click here, and so my first machine is new, so it's going to be quicker than the second machine, so it's going to be 0.8, right, because it's 20% quicker than the old machine, which was going to be just 1. So now that I define these, right, then you know, right, you have this factor time as a vector of real values, and these are the initial values. So the next variable I want to define is transfer time. The variable name is going to be transfer time because, of course, we're going to have the parts moving around, so we want to have some time, right? Sometime the parts will spend just transferring or moving from one station to another station. And so here I want to click on initial values to add it. And again, the transfer time will just be a single variable or a scalar. And I'm going to change it from 0 to 2. So that's going to be my initial value. So you can see here as well, right, you have transfer time, just a single variable with initial value of 2. And so these going to be the two variables that we'll be using. And the next thing I want to do is define some sets as I described. And so sets again are in basic process. I'm going to click on set here, right? That's a data module from basic process. I'm going to double click here to add a set. And my first set is going to be a set of resources to model the cell 3 machines. So that's how I'm going to call it, cell 3 machines. And there's 2 machines in the cell 3, so I'm going to add the members here. And before I do that, notice right now I have 0 members, so here I have no resources. So as I'm going to edit it, you'll see the change. So now I'm going to click here, and I'm going to double click here for the resource, and I'm renaming this resource as my cell 3 new. And then I'm going to double click again and name this as cell 3 old. And so again, right, we have cell 3 new machine and cell 3 old machine. So now we have 2 members, right? Again, if I double click here, I can see that as a set of resources with 2 members, first cell 3 new and then cell 3 old. And so quick question to you, does the order here matter? If I put here cell 3 old and here cell 3 new, would it be the same? You're right, the order does matter, right? And more importantly, we also be using a variable there, right? So we'll be using it in the process with the variables as well as right, to indicate, so it will depend, right? This will draw from the set, we save it as an attribute, the machine index attribute, and then we'll choose the variable from the time, from the factor time, right? We'll choose a specific factor, either 0.8 or 1. So it should correspond correctly to the new 0.8 because the new one is faster, 20% faster. And again, right, if we selecting it in the specific order, right, that order would matter, right? So it's important to place it in a specific order here. And so the next thing I want to do is define a few more sets. So as I promised, we're going to have the part pictures, and this is not going to be a resource, this is going to be an entity picture type of set. So I forgot to demonstrate, right? So as I added the 2 resources, before I did, there was 0 row here for cell 3 machines and nothing in the resource data module. So let's click on the resource data module. So now you can see we have cell 3 new and cell 3 old, and of course, you know, we have specific information for those machines. And so it will also report the statistics in terms of utilization of those machines as well. So let's go back to the set data module, and right now I don't have any members, but I have 3 different, right? So I need to add different, so I could actually have, right, either edit it separately Or I could change it, right, and select a specific picture and have a different picture here, right? So if I didn't want the report, I could possibly do a different picture. Or I can specify a name for that picture and then edit it. And so now I have part 3 for my entity pictures, right? And if I wanted, I can go to edit and then entity pictures, and I could add additional, right now, for example, I have, so maybe afterwards I can add something, and then I can have a picture of, say, blue ball, right? And I can copy it here, and I can also have and add another one and copy a picture of a red ball, and then click out here, add, and click on green ball and add the green ball here. And then if I wanted to add an additional ones afterwards, right, I could add here, have a picture ID as picture dot port 1, right, or click here on picture dot port 1 and then select, say, the blue ball and then copy it here. So now I have picture dot port 1, and also select the second one, say picture port 2, have the same picture ID if I wanted to. Picture dot port 2, select the red ball, add after this one, add another one. I guess I have to redo some of this, and then could rename this or not. So let's add another one, select part 3, add a green one in that. And so now let's say we can say it okay. So let's try to save our library. So we can save it into our folder, and let's say we're gonna have as book for model 7.1, and then I can say okay. So now I have my 3 different part pictures as in the single set, and I need another set. So set 3 will be containing entity types. So I'm going to name it as entity types. And of course the type is going to be changed from the resource to entity type. And then here right now we have no entity types. If I click on entity, you can see there is no entities, but when I click back on set and add the members, then you'll see how that changes. So I'm going to change it to part 1, part 2, and part 3. And so now if I click back, right, so here in my entity type set, I have part 1, 2, and 3, just like I wanted. And if I click on entity data module, now I have my part 1, 2, and 3. So that's just an initial picture, but right then I can reassign this. So now that I took care of some of the things for the basic process, let's move to advanced process, and that's where we want to use the expression. So I'm going to click on expression data module, and we're going to have an expression for cell 1 times entered here. So I'm going to have the name for the expression cell 1 times, and because we have two different machines, actually because we're gonna have 3 different parts, right? Because different parts is gonna be in cell 1, going through the cell 1, it will depend on the part index. So we're gonna have 3 different cell 1 times depending on the part index, and there's 3 different parts, part 1, part 2, part 3. That's why I click here and say 3 rows. I'll leave the data type as it is, and then I'm gonna change the expression values. So right now there is nothing here, right? If I double click on this, all I have is zeros. So what I want to do is I want to change this to the specific expressions. So I could just type this in, or if I didn't want to type this in, I could try doing the following. I could open it here, right, and then add, and then that's where I can use the expression builder, right? So notice what I did is I just clicked add here to add expression values. So I'm going to click add, and then in this expression values dialog, I can then right click, and then there's this drop down menu, and at the end of it there's build expression. So I click on build expression, and this is where my random distributions are, right? So you notice under random distributions we have selection, a very wide selection of different distributions, including what we need is triangular. So here I choose triangular and then added the parameters. So we have 6 as a minimum, most likely is 8, and the maximum is gonna be 10. So that's for the part 1. And so I click here, and then I can again click add, or I could have double clicked and then again do the same, build expression, select a random distributions, and then select the triangular, and then edit it either here or here. And so we have 11, 13, and then tab again, tab, and 15. And that's for part 2. And then again for part 3, I can also select triangular through building expressions, and under the random distributions I find triangular, and then I'm editing these parameters as 7, 10, and 13 for part 3. And as you remember, these are just the ones listed, right? So if you don't know where these came from, they came from that table. So let me demonstrate the table real quick. So notice this is a table that I'm talking about, right? That tells us about the processing time at different cells for each different part 1, 2, and 3. And so for cell 1, right, this is 6, 8, and 10, just like we entered. Then again for part 2, 11, 13, and 15, just like we entered. And then for part 3, this is a cell 1, right? So 7, 10, and 13, just like we entered. And so in fact, this is what you see, right, is these parameters, right, for the triangular distribution processing times at cell 1 for part 1, 2, and 3. And so now that we're done with it, and we click on this is going to change from 0 rows to 3. So in fact, it did. So we took care of the expression. The next thing we want to do here in the advanced process panel is added the advanced set. So do you recall what we need to do in advanced set? Great, you do remember we need to define the sequences, right? So the set of sequences cannot be defined through basic process. In fact, if I click here on the basic process and the under sets, then the only types that I could have is resource, counter, tally, entity type, and entity picture. So we cannot define the sequences here. But the advanced set from the advanced process panel allows me to actually select the set type as other. And so I can add into the set, right, into the set I can add my sequences. So I'm going to have a set called advanced set, of course, advanced set called part sequences. And in part sequences set, I will need to add 3 members because these are my sequences, right? So let me first define them and then I can select them. So I'm going to click to advanced transfer, and then under sequences I want to click here and I want to name this as part 1 process plan. So now I selected part 1 process plan, and then I also will have part 2 process plan. Of course, I'm doing this to add it, and then again, this is quicker just for me to add it. And so now I have part 1 process plan, part 2 process plan, and part 3 process plan. And we'll come back here because it's very important for us to define these steps, so we'll come back here later. But for now, I have named those sequences, so now I can use it under advanced process. So I'm clicking on advanced process and going back into my advanced set. So under advanced set data module, we have part sequences. So I can either double click here or double click here to add my part sequences. So if I click here, right, then this is what it allows me to do. But I'm not quite interested in that. So for me, it's actually might be easier to do this way. And then I can edit this, right? And instead of this member here, I could type in, or I could try, well, apparently can't really quite build an expression, but let me type in, and it's very important to not make any mistake here or typos. Part 1 process plan. And so again, similarly, we have part 2 process plan. And last but not least, we'll have part 3 process plan. Again, important not to make any typos. So we could have alternatively, right, copied this part, and then to make sure, right, we could have chose to go to the sequence and just copy those, right, to make sure that they're all typed in correctly. So this is just an alternative way to do that. I'm pretty sure we have typed everything properly and don't have the typos. So the next thing I want to do is at this point start some of the modeling. So let me review a few things. So here we have already took care of editing entity pictures, and I demonstrated that. So I'll just review what we did, right? We want to edit entity pictures, and then we were able to create the 3 custom pictures, picture.part1, picture.part2, picture.part3. And then what we did is just copied blue, red, and green ball pictures, renamed them, and right, used it. And we could have added the numbers as well into the ball if we wanted to, which I demonstrated how to do in some of the earlier lectures. So now what we're going to do is actually build the models that we took care of most of the data structures. We are now ready to start building the models. So first things first is the arrival of the parts. So we'll use the create module from the basic process for arrival of each part, and so we'll use one at a time. Time between arrivals will be exponential with an average of 13 minutes, and we don't know part type at that time, but right after that, which will be technically at the same time, we'll have the parts or entities go through the assign module, and that's where we're going to assign the part attributes. So what we can do is we can actually use the discrete distribution to be able to assign the part index, and so the part index will be drawn from the discrete probability distribution. And important to remember that this discrete probability distribution is actually needs to be, we need to use the cumulative probability values. So if we had, say, 26 and 17 or something like that, then we would get 26 plus 17, right? And that would be the cumulative if we had, for example, the 26% and 17%. So next, what we'll do, right, we'll assign the part index first, and then based on the part index, we'll be assigning entity sequence as getting it from part sequences, which we defined, right, the set of sequences, and that will depend on the part index. And we'll also have the entity type, and entity type will also depend on part index, and we already have defined entity types as a set in the basic process, so we're going to be using that. And an entity picture was another set, and that was part pictures, named part pictures. So we'll use this part pictures also dependent on part index. So let's go ahead and take care of the create and the assign. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how to do that. So first of all, we're going to go to the basic process, and that's where the create is located. So I'm going to click on create and pull the create here. And then I'm going to rename this by double clicking on it. So now I have the dialog, and I'll name it as create parts. And I'll just leave this as entity type because we're going to define the types, right? This really doesn't matter for us. We're just going to define the types through this assign. So again, it's going to be random, average 13. We need to change the units importantly to minutes. And then the rest remains as it is. And so next thing is to do the assign. So as you see, it's already selected. So as I click and pull the assign here, it will connect the two. So now I'm connecting my assign. I'm going to double click on assign and rename this assign part type and sequence. And so here then I'll go and add the assignments. So first thing is going to be our attribute. So I change the type to attribute. And the name of the attribute, we can scroll down to find it, is going to be part index. And as I promised, we're going to assign the values based on the distribution. So let me show you what part types we had. So here we had 3 different types. We had 26% of first type and then 48% of second type. So because it's going to be cumulative, for the first one we're going to have 0.26, right, because there's nothing to accumulate, and that's going to be for 1. And then for the second it's going to be 0.26 plus 0.48. So that's going to be 0.74 together. And then, of course, if you add all of them together, right, and that will be for 2. And when you add all of them together, that would add to 100% or 1, and that will be for type 3. So again, we're using the cumulative distribution. So now I'm going to use my expression builder. So instead of this new value of 1, I'm going to right-click, and here in the dialog, I'm going to select Build Expression. And then in the build expression, I'm going to choose random distributions. And when I open random distributions, there is discrete probability. So when I click discrete probability, it also tells me this important message that I'm using cumulative probabilities and the values. And notice, first we have the probability, then the value. Probability, then the value. So now I can edit that. And so at first I have 26%, so it's 0.26. I have my value for the part index as 1. And then I'm going to have, right, at the next one, right, I have the cumulative probability of 0.74, which is 26 and 48, right? And that's for part 2. And then I have 1 for part index 3. So now that I type this in, this is the correct expression. I'm going to say click OK and OK here, and that defines my part index. And next I'm going to have type attribute, right? And so I'm going to define another attribute, and that attribute is going to be called entity sequence, right? Because we need to define the entity sequence based on that. So it's going to be entity.sequence. And in here I can actually also use the expression builder. So I'm going to click on build expressions, and of course this expression builder dialog pops up. And as you remember, the entity sequences were combined together into advanced set. So I'm going to go here to advanced process, and then advanced set. I'm going to click on advanced set, and I'm going to have the I'm going to use my set, so I can use any of these, right, and then just edit it. So rather than using that, I only need my cell 3 machines, right, as the name. Well, actually my set name is part sequences, right? So I'm going to use part sequences, and then here I'm going to choose it, right? So part sequences is its type of advanced set that I wanted, and then inside I'm going to reference the part index, and part index is of course a basic process variable, and more specifically it's an attribute. So I'm going to click on attribute value and then select the part index. So scroll down here, right click here, and then scroll down to part index. And so now I built my expression as part sequences, and the specific part sequence that I want is one indexed by part index. And so that provides me an expression for my entity sequence. And then very similarly, I'm going to take care of the entity type and also entity pictures. So let me go ahead and do that. So again, attribute, then I'm gonna have entity type, and here I can use the expression builder and then select the set. And again, right, I don't have the value, but I could choose any of these and then edit it. So the set that I'm interested in is entity types, because I'm defining the entity type attribute. And then just edit this part out and index my entity type by the part index, which of course is an attribute. And then I can click on value and then scroll down to part index. And so last but not least, I'm going to do the same for the pictures. So again, it's going to be attribute, and attribute name is entity picture. And then here, added it through building the expression. And in the building expression, I'm going to click on the set, choose any set. It doesn't really matter which one. I just want to select the part pictures, and then I'm going to edit this out because I'm not interested in using that, and then clicking on this and then selecting the attribute, and the specific value of the attribute is going to be part index because my part pictures are indexed by specific part index. And so now that I did that, I finish my assign. And so we're ready to review what other things we want to do. So you can see here we assign part type of sequence, and we have altogether 4 different assignments. So let's go ahead and review. So next thing we're gonna model is release of the arriving entity into a system. And so we're gonna use previously defined sequences assigned to the entity, which we used in advanced process. We define, in advanced process we use the advanced set, and then in advanced transfer we use sequences, and we combine those into advanced set. So now we can send the arriving entity through a station module to define its current station location, and the station name will be order release, and then we'll have other 5 station names that we're going to define through different stations, and then we add that into a sequence because, as you remember, we haven't added our sequences yet, and we'll have a route module to start it on its way, and then in the route module we'll have transfer time to indicate how long it takes for the part to move from one station to another. And that was a variable that we defined, and that will be in minutes, and then the destination time will be by sequence. And so the arena will take care of routing the parts based on that sequence. And if it's going to be just a route, so arena initializes its job step attribute on its own. So let's go ahead and do that. So now we're gonna go to the advanced transfer, and that's where we have our stations, right? So right now we don't have any stations, so we're gonna click, we already selected this assign, we're gonna connect our station to the assign. And so my first station is gonna be called order release station. And so the name of the station is going to be order release, and the type is going to be, of course, station, so we're going to be collecting the statistics, so that's fine. And the next thing, as I mentioned, is going to be a route, so we're going to connect this station to the route, and for its route we're also going to rename this as start sequence. And the route time is going to be dependent on the transfer time, right? So we can actually build the expression here, or type in the transfer, so easier for me to just build the expression. So I selected it and right-clicked to get to the expression builder dialog. And then in the expression builder dialog, remember that our transfer time that we'll be using is a variable, and so it's under basic process variables. And so you can see right under the basic process variables, there's a variable, and if you don't have this open and viewable, you just click here, and here's your variable. And clicking a variable, you can select current value, and then we need to click next to the variable name, and this is where we can scroll down to transfer time. So we'll be using the transfer time. So now we replace this with transfer time, and it's also important for us to change the units from hours to minutes. That's quite important. And so instead of destination type that's default selected as a station, we're going to change this to by sequence. And then say OK, and this takes care of our start sequence. And so the next thing we're going to do is do the other logic. And specifically, we're going to work on logic for cell 1. So we'll use a station module to define station location. So our station name will be cell 1. And then we have cell 1 process module. And the actions there will be seize, delay, release. We'll have resources subdialog. We'll get the resources. The for resource name is cell 1 machine. We'll seize a single cell 1 machine, of course. And then delay type will be expression. So we're going to build this expression cell 1 times, and then it will be dependent on part index. And that we already defined our cell 1 times in the expression module in advanced process. And then we'll use a route module to route from cell 1. And the destination again will be by sequence. And so we'll use the stations later to add the sequences. So we'll also use this logic for cell the same way. We'll have the logic for cell 2 and 4, except in the process module we're going to have the expression for delay time, and that expression will be based on process time, which, as you remember, is an attribute. So later in the sequences, we're going to be defining the sequence. We're going to change the process time each time. So as you know, the part type 2 will visit cell 2 twice, so we're going to be taking care of it all in the assignment in the sequence. And then we'll have the outgoing route module similar to cell 1. So let's go ahead and take care of the logic for 1 and also the logic for cells 2 and 4. So here I'm going to do the logic for cell 1, and I'm going to start with the station first, and then I'm going to have a process, and then I'm going to have a route. So I'm going to click here, get the station, and of course I'm going to edit it. And this will be call 1 station. Cell 1 station. And so the name will be cell 1. And we leave the station as a type, or station type as a station. And then we have report statistics selected because we want to know the statistics or record the statistics. And then we go to the basic process because we need to use a process. the station is already selected, so it will automatically connect one to another. And so next, in the process, I can double click on it and rename this as the cell 1 process. And my action is going to be seize, delay, release. And here I'm going to add my resource. So the resource will be cell 1 machine. And of course I'm going to seize 1. So next I'm going to change the delay type to expression, units importantly to minutes. And then here, as you remember, we need to build the expression based on this cell 1 times, which is an expression, right? So I'm right clicking and then select build expression. The expression builder pops up, and in expression builder I have expressions under advanced process variables. So again, if it's not open, I click on advanced process variables, or here, and then an expression, and then the value, and here's my cell 1 times. But as you remember, cell 1 times depends on part type, so we need to index it. So I'm indexing it, and that's where I need the attribute part time. So I click on under basic process variables, I click on attribute, then the value, and here under attribute name I need to find my part index. So I click on part index, and that builds my expression. Again, we're gonna collect the statistics, so it's all good now. And the next thing to do is to add the route from the advanced transfer. So I'm going to select the route and get added here. So editing the route, I'm going to say route from cell 1. So that's going to be the name of my route, and then I'll have the transfer time here. So again, through the expression builder, I can click, right click to get the expression builder, and then here I need to select the transfer time, which was a variable, so it's found under basic process variables. And then here under variable we have current value, and then drop down to transfer time. And now I can say OK, and importantly I need to change the units to minutes, and then the destination type will be by sequence. So now that I got that under control, I had this done, and so the next thing for me, I could actually reuse some of this, right? So I could select the whole thing here, and then I can copy it by right-clicking and say copy, and then I can paste wherever I want it, right? So let's say here I want the cell 2, and of course, right, it's because I duplicate this, it will, right, create this error notification for me, so it's highlighted, but it's okay because I'm gonna edit it very soon. And again, I'm gonna paste this again for the cell 4. So this will be cell 2 and this will be cell 4. So let me go ahead and change some of the things. So here I could rename it as cell 2 station, and more importantly, rename this as cell 2. The rest remains okay, and right away I'm going to change this for the route. So this is the only thing I need to do for the route. And let me do this for cell 4. So I'm going to change this to cell 4, and also the station name to cell 4. And similarly for route, I'm going to change this to route from cell 4. So these are very identical almost, but the processes are different. So again, right, they are duplicates, so there's this notification about the non-unique name that we have, but that's okay because we're gonna edit it anyways, right? So this is gonna be my cell 2 process, and I'm gonna change this to right cell 2 machine. That's very important. So change this to cell 2 machine, and importantly, my expression is going to be different. So it's not going to be cell 1 times because this is the cell 2 process. So instead, I'm going to build a different expression that involves process time. So we're going to have process time here, right? So process time is the attribute that we had. So it's under basic process variables. So in case that you don't have it open, right, you just click on basic process variables, then an attribute, then the value of the attribute, and then when you scroll down under attribute name, you see process time. So now we have this expression that says process time. So I say okay. Again, I already changed this to minutes, right? I already edited this to have a resource cell 2 machine, and this is cell 2 process. So everything is taken care of here. And the same thing I'm going to do for cell 4 just to demonstrate to you how we can do that. But alternatively, I could have just copied, added this first, then copied, and then added it again, right? So I want to make sure I change my resource name here because it has its own resource, so cell 4 machine is going to be used. And then expression is still minutes. So the only other things that I need to do, other than what I just did, changing cell 4 here and cell 4 here, I need to change this expression, right? So again, I can right click and then click on build expression. That leads me to expression builder. And in expression builder under basic process variables, I have my attributes, and that's where I select the value, and then scroll under the attribute names, right, this list, the drop down list where I want to select my process time. So it's going to be process time here, and then this is fine. So now I say okay, and it just took care of this non-unique names. So now I'm almost done, except that I need to add the cell 3, right? So I want to create something similar for cell 3. So that will be discussed in the second part of the lecture.